Transferable skills.
From Cackle Media, this is Transferable Skills. I'm Noah Mishkin, and today's guest is Taiwo Oyeniyi, who shares his skills journey from chemical engineering into software engineering. I hope you enjoy. Taiwo, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us where you want to begin.
In high school, I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. I was fascinated about planes. I think initially I want to be a pilot. As I grew older, I was like, okay, no, actually, pilots don't build the plane, they just fly it. So great. Who are the people that build this plane? Aeronautical engineers? Okay, great. I want to be one. And that was my dream for a long time, up until when I looking to come to the US to study. And basically, one of my advisors then said, look, we don't think you're going to be able to get a visa on that basis because they're going to ask you which company are you going to come back to work for. And Nigeria doesn't have any plane building company. So we don't think it's going to work. So go find something else.
What if you didn't want to go back to Nigeria and you wanted to go somewhere else? Would it still be a problem?
You have to be able to prove that you're coming back to Nigeria. That's that's the bar to rise above. So I basically said, you know what? I think I'm very good at chemistry and math. And I think chemical engineering, my parents will not pay for me to go study chemistry. It's not happening. It has to be engineering. It has to be medicine or being a lawyer or something in accounting. So I decided, okay, great. I think I can do chemical engineering. And that is how I became a chemical engineer.
Were your parents afraid that if you studied chemistry, you were going to go into a life of research and academia? And they were worried a little bit about maybe that's not good enough for them?
I think it's like in the Nigerian context, if you study chemistry, chemistry is actually not that bad. Let's say physics. If you study physics, because chemistry, you can go work for the oil and gas companies. You could still work there. But let's say physics or some other major where you likely will just become a teacher or you will not work in your field. Those are the two options. So I think that's how parents love judge careers. And it's always said that there are four things you can do in Nigeria. You can be a lawyer, you can be a banker or something in finance, you can be an engineer or a doctor, because those fields pay well, right? Yeah. So their consideration is we're going to send you to the US to go study chemistry for 4 years. We're going to pay all this money. You're just going to come back home and be a chemistry teacher. So that's not good enough. And so I said, you know what, I can do it. I love engineering. So chemical engineering makes more sense. And so that was easy. That's easier to go to the embassy and talk to the consul and say, hey, I'm going to go study chemical engineering and I'm going to come back and work for Exxon or Shell and BP somewhere in Nigeria. So that makes sense. So that's literally why I chose that major.
And then did you go back and work in that field?
I did not. I did not. Things change, by my second year in college, I was tired of college. Number one, I was like, you know what, I'm done. This is very, very tasking. I actually my plan was to go get a PhD. Nigerian parents love their kids getting PhDs. So my plan was, no, I'll get a PhD. But by my second year, I think halfway through my sophomore year, I was like, this school thing is not just for me. I'm doing fine, but I can't sit down for another 9 years to do this, or 7 years at the time. And so I decided, no, I want to do other things. And then by my third year, I started getting interested in like building software. And that was when Facebook was on the rise and all these cool apps were coming out, Uber, Airbnb. So I said, no, it would be nice to build an app. I mean, it looks like it's like some kid on the couch with a computer is able to build really cool stuff. So I can do the same. And so before I finished college, I had to finish college just to get my diploma, but I was pretty much on the path to writing software at that point. It was clear I have to go learn this myself to basically control my own destiny in a sense. And so I finished, I went to work at Goldman. And then at that time, really, I had two options. Either I stay in school or I get a job. There's no in between. There's no, sleep on your parents' couch. You're going to get kicked out of the country. So I basically said, okay, you know what, let me work for a bit, just de-stress really from all that school stuff. And then I decided to go back to studying my master's in computer science. So and again, back then there weren't that many, I don't think boot camps really existed. You might find, material online, but there was no short structured learning environment at the time. Most people in that class consider the class tedious. I'm never going to do this. I'm never going to use this in my life. I'm a chemical engineer. What is this C code and loops and arrays I'm doing? And so for me, I just wanted to pass the class. I know I was tired of being in college. I just wanted to finish at the time, but I didn't think I would end up on the comp sci or software engineering path.
But you were saying that a lot of the chemistry majors might find that class to be tedious and difficult, but you
Yes.
found it to be pretty easy.
It was easy. Yeah, it wasn't too bad. It wasn't that hard. It is, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, compared to other things you're doing in chemical engineering, it's like, this is just a pain for me to get through. I have to do these things I'm not interested in.
Yeah.
But I think it was relatively easy for sure. I think that knowing math and knowing and going through the rigor of science helps you with being a better coder. But you don't actually have to know a lot of math to be good at coding, because it's not every time you're not building things that are summing things up or doing calculus and things like that. So I think it's more of the analytical skills you pick up from being a math major or doing math, and that helps. But you don't have to be. I mean, I think I'm good at math, but I don't think I'm excellent at math in any way.
I think it's sort of math adjacent, right?
Yes.
It's not so much like the quantitative math skills, but more the
Yes.
logic and sequencing.
Yes, I think that is the skill. That's the core skill. And yes, so being exposed to science or math certainly helps you to think in those sense, or in that sense. Yeah. So after I got my master's, which was very difficult, that's a different story.
It was a lot harder once you got into your grad school program.
Yeah, getting to grad school program in comp sci was very difficult. So when I finished, I started applying for jobs, and this is an interesting story. This actually I met Alon.
Alon is a very good friend of mine from many years ago. We met in Boston.
Okay.
And
Okay.
he's the one who introduced us for you to be on the show, and you
Yeah.
guys worked together. So you met him
Yeah.
around grad school time.
Yes, I did. I was applying for jobs at the time. This was 2014, and I got desperate because I was gonna get married in like 3 months from when I started applying. So I was like, okay, I need a job. And I'm an international student, so you have limited options. And I was trying to stay in DC. I kept applying, and I got so desperate. I went on Craigslist. I said, you know what? I'm gonna find jobs on Craigslist. If it says computer, it's probably enough for me to get a visa. I'm telling you, that is exactly what I was thinking in my head. Because I'm like, I think if it says computer, I should be good to go.
Yeah.
So I kept applying. And so I saw this role came up. It says, you work for a media company that produces shows around the world. It didn't say the name at the time. So I said, okay, great. I sent my resume, a lone response. I remember he said he lived in Nigeria, I think for a couple of years. So I was like, oh, that's great. I'm Nigerian. And so I think that made it easier for us to have a conversation. And then he had me come in. So I went in, did the interview, and I passed the interview. And then I remember they said, okay, we were going to hire a software engineer for after we filled this role, because this was a travel role where I get to operate software at the UFC events. And then we were going to hire a software engineer to I guess, build software after we fill this role. Since you have a master's in computer science, or you find doing both, I'm like, I think that's the dream. I get to travel. I love traveling. I get to write software. That's perfect. And that's how I joined Alon at Fightmetric at the time.
So for the listeners out there, Fightmetric was a company that was started by a couple of my friends. Alon is one of the co-founders. It was basically a combination of analytics data as well as graphics and media for UFC, for mixed martial arts. And they were the early emerging data collectors. Here's the other thing. I'm going to say one more thing about Alon. Since he's not here, it's great to talk about people when they're not present. Could never say this to his face. He happens to be one of the most interesting, fun, intelligent people that I've ever met in my entire life. I've never had a conversation with him that wasn't insightful, interesting, and enjoyable. So that was your first job.
Yes. Yeah.
This is your first full-time software engineering job after graduate school. And there's a lot of jobs out there. You can go work at many different types of companies. You can go work at a huge company in which you're one person on a huge team, or maybe multiple teams, and a lot of mentors, a lot of peers and support. And then there's another experience in somewhat of a technology startup. You're one of three. They're relying on you. What was that like early on? Was there pressure? Did you feel empowered and excited, or was it stressful?
No, I absolutely enjoyed it. I like the challenge it presents. So like I said earlier, I made a conscious effort to not apply to some of the usual hubs. And like at Howard University, I think Howard had almost like a pipeline to like Google and Microsoft, right? I have friends that work there, but I wanted to stay in DC. That's number one. Number two, I wanted to work in sort of small institutions where I can sort of make impact as quickly as possible. I think in part because I'd worked at a nonprofit and I just liked how it was just like seven of us around a table. I liked the just the relationship I built with people I worked with then. And so I think for me, I was looking for that environment where that small team where we can go hang out for lunch, come back, write some code. Tomorrow that code has been deployed, it's been used in some real application. So that's I think for me it wasn't stressful at all. That was the challenge I wanted. And it was great because I would have a conversation with Elon for requirements and things like that. And then I take the requirements. It's my job to go, in some cases, design, build, deploy, and just send Elon the link. Say, here's the link for you to go try it out. So I absolutely enjoyed working across the stack, as they say.
Yeah. Full stack.
Yeah.
You have a strong background already and interest in chemistry, and you started studying that. I'm curious how some of the skills have transferred over from prior to being a software engineer. Some of the things that maybe you grew up with, surrounded by the skills that you feel you had that were strong skills that you now leverage in software engineering.
Interesting. That's a good question. We talked about some earlier, which is just your ability to analyze things. That's what math and science sort of helps you do. You need to look at a problem and be able to go through it step by step. I think really the other part of it, another way to look at it, is destructuring things, right? In software engineering, a lot of times the end goal is what you have in mind. I want to build a call center software, for example. That's the end goal. And then you sort of have to go work your way backwards and break it down. And so in chemical engineering, for example, part of my training is we want to build a plant that has this much flow rate for producing fertilizers or something, right? Same thing, it's the end goal. But there's a lot that has to go into just building the plant to get to that end goal. So being able to work your way backwards and destructure the problem into smaller bits. So I think it's the same in software. You have the end goal, you know where you're trying to get to, but there's a lot of research, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in smaller bits and then put together to get you to the final state. That's a super critical skill. I think in addition to that, being detail oriented, I think helps also. Because again, same thing, you're building a plant, you don't want it to blow up. You want to make sure, temperatures have to stay at a certain level. It needs to stay there. So every detail matters. Otherwise, this could be people's lives lost and things like that. And so I think those skills, that kind of training, I think is something that I took into my software engineering career, and it's been super helpful.
If there's a lot of different ways to get to the end goal, are there right and wrong ways in your opinion?
I'll try it right and wrong. I would say yes. There are maybe solutions you should simply not do, but there could be multiple good solutions.
Like best practices, you mean?
Yes, exactly. Right. So there are certain things simply don't do that. It could work, but you shouldn't do that. There are things that you can do where you can have multiple options. And so it depends on the context, really. It depends on the context. I wouldn't say it might be good in a certain scenario because, for example, the choice of database. People might say, use Postgres, use a relational database. Don't use a relational database. And you have people in sort of on both sides where it's like, those are the bad guys, we're the good guys. It's not that simple. Sometimes it's the context. What's the data you're dealing with? And that would determine what is the right solution.
Do you think those people who make those suggestions for what you would seem to say is a bad solution for that, given that context, do you think they admit that and recognize that? What is driving those decisions? If there is a pretty strategic best practice to follow, then why do people perhaps not follow it? You can make assumptions for how people think. This is your time to tell me why other people are wrong.
Right, that's what I'm thinking. I think it's best. Let me think about this. I think one is just innate bias. If you built your career around a certain technology, you're going to want to stick to that. You become myopic in a sense. You can't see anything else. So that's one. And you have to actively or consciously try to avoid that. Even for me also, there's certain technologies I like using, and that's my go-to. So you need to be open-minded. So people are closed-minded because of just, what they're used to and the fear of maybe going to try something else. I think that's maybe the biggest issue really. It's just, I'm used to this technology and I think it's the best. And yes, it can solve the problem, but it might not be the best tool for solving that problem. So I think that's the number one, at least in my career, that's the number one thing I've seen. And honestly, even sometimes personally, I have to fight that urge to want to stick to a certain thing I'm used to.
Yeah, that makes sense. that's going to happen a lot more when you're talking to somebody outside of your team and outside your community, especially if you're partnering with somebody else and they have a different methodology and practice. So they might have differing opinions and how they go about executing. Does that ever happen internally on a team where you have, especially on a small team, 2 or 3 engineers, and you know the end goal, you know the project that you're working on and how to execute it, but you have differing opinions of how to do that?
I think that's happened, and I think that's good. That's a good thing, right? I don't think you want an engineering team where everyone thinks the same. It's not good because you're not going to always have answers, or at least have the best answers. So it's always good to have different opinions on how to implement something. And the right way is to then table those options. Say, okay, I think we should implement it this way. I think we should go this product or that product. And we can look at the pros and cons, and look at the context, and then make a decision without not being closed-minded. We can be open-minded because we have different experiences. The people that have been doing this much longer. That's a good thing on a team. If your team has different opinions and different skill set, it's a good thing. You bring all those options on, put it on the table, and then we can talk about it and decide, okay, maybe this will work better for this particular problem.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep.
Having a diverse team is, in my opinion, always going to benefit you. You're always going to be able to, at the very least, understand the problem and potential solution better. At the very least, the exploration, the development towards that goal is going to be at least a far more rich, robust conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
And typically probably going to be a better execution too, but not always. Sometimes people are great at thinking and just poor at executing. It makes me think of like the many people who are unbelievable coaches, great analysts, understand a sport, understand a game, but just they're not athletic or can't actually do it themselves. It doesn't mean that they're any less favorable or their opinion and strategy matters less. It's just interesting to think that you could command a strong perspective and knowledge about something, but not be able to actually fulfill it yourself firsthand.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. Yeah.
Are you good at your job?
I think so. I am. I think I am, but I think people around me, people I've worked with in the past can say, will probably be the best people to ask, but I think they would say yes.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why you're recommended to be on here. It's not just because of your background and how you have pivoted into engineering for software and technology, but also we'll get to your leadership role too, because part of a pivot isn't just switching careers or jobs. Right. It's also switching the role that you're in, what you're doing. Right. You could be doing the same subject matter, but completely different role within an organization. I'm also curious to know what makes somebody good in that role, in the job that you had early on as a software engineer. When you're hiring somebody or when you're coaching and training and mentoring a junior or early stage developer, what do you look for signs for them, skills that they possess, or behavior that makes them good at their job?
Interesting. Yeah. So it's a good question. So in terms of what makes someone good at a job, so let's consider when I was at the UFC. Because of the nature of the role, it's simply, are you good at writing code? And are you good at solving problems? Are you good at thinking? I still remember the question I was asked for that job on that job interview. I was supposed to do it's almost like it's not a chess board, but it's like a 2x2 grid. It wasn't so much that they wanted me to write the code, but can you think through how to solve this problem? So I think if you're hiring people, and especially someone that had not worked before, they're coming out of college, what you're testing for is the ability to think through problems. And personally, I don't care so much about your ability to write code in a specific language, right? Whether it's JavaScript or Ruby, I don't care too much about that. It's more so, here's a problem. Can we think through how to solve it? When I interview people, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking at your ability to think critically about an issue and then solve it. And less so, can you write how to loop through an array in Ruby? That's a trivial task at this point, right?
You mentioned two different things that are not opposing principles, but I'm curious how the relationship is. You first of all talked about the logic, understanding how they think strategically, creatively to problem solve, regardless of the solution. And then you also mentioned, and I want to see if they got the solution right. So which is more important, or what happens like when you really like how someone thinks, but they get the solution wrong? What does that tell you?
So it's how you think is more important than getting the solution. Because sometimes in an interview, people are nervous, people are on the edge, things like that, and they may not be that far. Sometimes they're overthinking the problem. They are just hyper because they want a job, and they're just super tense. So the solution is great, and if I see two people that had roughly the same sort of thought process, and one got the solution, one did not get the solution, one that got the solution might rank higher. That's a fact. But if everyone sort of thought through it but never got to the end, who had the best of thought process, the best critical thinking around the problem? So that's number one. That's the most important thing. I think outside an interview where people tend to be a bit more relaxed, and it might be easier for them to get to the solution without having someone just watch them and say, okay, give me an answer. I'm waiting for you. You have 2 minutes to give me an answer. People might get tense. So yeah, because I've been there.
That is part of the test, though, too, is there are times, maybe not in most roles, but there are some times when pressure can be a factor, and you want to see, can people perform under pressure, even if most of the time that's not the case. I'm not suggesting that you need to make a pressure cooker for every interview.
Right.
In fact, quite the opposite. I'm a big proponent of making it casual so you can understand the person and trying to take some of the air and pressure out of the room.
Right.
I get that. So I guess that's a third component. It's what is their logic and reasoning? Did they get the solution, and how do they perform under pressure? So those are three different metrics to maybe grade rate candidate during that process too.
Yeah. If someone says, you know what, you give them a problem and they make no attempt, they're so freaked out, they make no attempt at doing it, then that's a problem. But if they make an attempt and then they try and they're calm, they're thinking through it, and then they do not get to an answer, but they sort of make some progress, that's fine.
How long were you at that company? Did you stay in that role exactly, or did you move into different roles? And then where did you go from there?
All right, so I was at the UFC for 4 years. That's Fight Metric UFC, all so merged into one. So that was 4 years. And so I came in as a software engineer, and then I think when I was leaving, I was pretty much a senior software engineer then. And then I left the UFC to join Distrobird to basically lead the engineering function at that company. It was a small company too. And I came in, I came in as a third engineer. One of the first things I did when I joined was building out its omni-channel communication platform. So the company was primarily an SMS communication tool, but many customers were asking, hey, we do, SMS is great, but we still do emails. We use this product for email. We use that product for voice. Can we do it all in one place? Okay, well, sure, I guess we can. And so we decided to start building this new platform. But one of the things I decided at the time was, you know what, we're not going to build off the current one because the current product is a bit dated. Let's just start over. So we started over. And that was actually when I introduced React for the front end portion of the application. Sometimes there are newer technologies that are better, but if you're used to something, you might want to stick to it. But I went to actually go learn React. I said, okay, guys, I think we need to build this platform from scratch for this new product we're trying to build.
Can you tell me what those conversations were like when you're suggesting that adding this new product that you want to build is going to require re-architecturing, starting from scratch, building their platform?
Those conversations can be difficult sometimes, for sure. Because, again, for like sales or business dev people, it's like 3, 4, 5 months. That's what's going to take. And you guys are going to start over. So all the stuff we've done, it's not going to be used. Their concern is, you're not going to ship product fast enough if you go do this. And I think it was clear the product we're trying to build was far more, complicated and just dynamic than the current product. And the best tool right at the time, maybe still the same today, was for front ends anyway, was React. And so I think making it clear, look, we need to do this. This will allow us to build more interesting things in the future. And this is a conversation I always have to have with folks on the project or on the business side, right? Because sometimes we want to make a technical decision that doesn't really contribute to, again, shipping product, but it's necessary. And it's not to get into the weeds of it. It's more so, look, if we make this change now, yes, it might cost us 3-4 months to re-architect with a new tool. But long term, or even in the short to medium term, we can build things a lot faster. We can build more interesting things. And so we were basically building side by side in a sense. And at some point, we just migrated all the customers over. It's a new platform.
In your role, were you also partially or fully responsible for product?
I was partially responsible for product. So I think yes, I managed the engineering team, but also I managed product, but more from an engineering perspective. And then
Yeah.
the CEO managed product more from like, business development, design, because he's very good at design, more from a design and business development perspective. So in a sense, we're both PMs. He would create the scope and the designers will work on it. And my job would be to look at the designs and talk through it. What is feasible, what's not feasible, what kind of timelines are we expecting, things like that. And then I can take that and then go to the engineering team and say, guys, all right, here's what we need to build. Let's break this down. Who's going to work on this portion? Who's going to work on that portion? I don't think I ever sort of left being sort of like a PM fully. I think at different points through my time doing some PM work and then also writing code.
There's a big difference between being a full stack developer
Right.
and the responsibilities and skills of a chief technology officer.
Yeah.
Where did you learn scheduling, budgeting, roadmap, projections on a whole project? Like, where did that come from?
There was no one I could call up and ask questions.
Yeah.
But there was a ton of data, a ton of material online I could read from. It's mostly, I think, mostly self-learning.
Yeah, trial and error, self-learning.
Yeah.
You just have to be self-motivated and driven.
Yeah.
There's something that I've always been curious about. I understand when you're putting together a product roadmap and you're evaluating everything from start to deployment, everything. I understand the costs. The costs are very simple. It's a simple calculation. It's based on time and what the people cost.
Right.
How do you figure out how long it will take to build something? What is the process for figuring that timeline out?
That is extremely difficult. Some people say that it's an art, it's not a science. It's tough. It's difficult, especially if you've not done something similar before, then it becomes very difficult. One of the things we built was a calling software. I had not done anything like that before. Some of our timelines did not work. That's the truth. But if it's something you've done before, and it's easier to estimate, it took me this long, even if you're not at my skill level, I think we can account for a couple more weeks or months for you to build it. It's difficult. Some people talk about how long it took them to build certain products online, so you can learn from that. But the best way to try to even come to an estimate is to break down the product or the feature into small bits as much as you can. Do your research. If it's a new product, do a lot of in-depth research so that you have fewer sort of curveballs once you start developing, because you can start developing and say, oh, sorry, I didn't think about this. Well, that's 2 weeks. No. So again, you probably wouldn't cover everything, but do as much research. If there's someone you can contact that has done something similar, you can talk to them. But you need to break down the task into small bits. Then it's easier to estimate, okay, I need authentication. All right, that should probably take me a week to spin together. And then I need this, I need that. So the best way to estimate is to break it down into small bits as much as you can, where estimation can be more realistic. But if you just say, okay, it's going to take me 1 month to build a calling software, that's too vague. That's too vague. You can't go into Jira or engineering software and put that calling software as your task and put 1 month. It's just too broad.
Right.
Personally, I always do estimations with it. If it's not my task, I like to do estimations with the developers themselves. I trust them a lot, so I prefer to say, what are you thinking? How long do you think it's going to take? They can measure their skill and they can determine, okay, it's going to take me 2 weeks. Okay, great, 2 weeks is fine. If it's going to take longer, okay, what's happening? Is it too much stuff in there, or there's just you don't know enough? And should we break it up and maybe assign a portion of it to someone else? Things like that. It's a bit of an art. Maybe it's a science if you've done something before, something similar, and then you can just draw from that experience. But a lot of people say, after you make the estimations, just slap on another 2 weeks to it.
That's what I always tell everybody in construction and projects. I'm like, always assume 15 to 20% over on your budget and time.
Yeah, it's true. It happens, but it's difficult. I've not met one anyway that would say, you know what, I knew exactly how to get this down to the day. On this day, this is when the product will be done. Not really.
I was going to ask you what your on-time success statistics are. Like, how often are you on time, and how often, if ever, are you ahead of schedule?
On bug fixes, of course, we're typically on schedule, but on like big features and like products, I think we're maybe 60% on time, 60-70% on time. We typically overrun by, sometimes a month. It just depends on the actual project.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't. It's hard that we're on time. It's just the truth, and I think it's a failure of us estimating properly. Because I think a lot of times, especially when you work at like startups, everyone is super optimistic. So even engineers are optimistic about timelines. Oh yeah, I can get it done in 2 weeks, no problem. We need to get this Salesforce integration done for a customer. Yeah, I can get it done in 3 days. And it's not an estimation that comes out of proper, like, just thinking about what needs to be done. It's more, it needs to be done in 3 days. Customer is going to be happy. The biz dev folks are going to be happy. I think if I stay up all night for 3 days, yeah, I shouldn't have any problem. I should be able to get it done. That's sort of the quick process that goes through their minds, or their heads, and so that, oh yeah, I can get it done in 3 days. And it typically doesn't work out that way.
At the risk of, this is not an attack. I'm just curious from the mindset of somebody in your position. If 60% of your projects are over by, let's just say, a period of time, doesn't matter how long, but typically about the same amount, percentage over, what are the downsides or the risks of baking that in always so that way you are on time and starting to learn from the data? Is it that you're worried the client or internally you would struggle to get approval?
I think I wouldn't bake in some 30 to 40% of just delays into projects, because I think if you give yourself more time, there's a chance that you're going to use up all the time, right? And I think a lot of times as developers, you think you have time because you're not expecting to run into a problem, right? So you think you have time. And so if we give ourselves more time, we will fill the room. We'll use up the entire time. So even I think we need to do better at estimation, especially when you're going back to a client and you're telling them it's going to take me 4 days and I'll be out in 4 days. But I wouldn't just throw in just a generous amount of time in there, because I think you just end up overrunning that. And then also, once you have that, there's also a high chance of scope creep, where someone might come and say, oh, you know what? You guys, we have 2 months. So can we just add that? Without changing the timeline. So that's why I don't recommend it. I think we need to do better at estimations, which usually means that we need to break down our task even further or reduce the scope.
Yeah, that's a great answer. This is a question that I've been asking people for years. What job might you have that you would love to do? You'd kill it. You'd be really good at it, but you're exceedingly overqualified for it. What would be that guilty pleasure job?
Yeah, maybe a high school teacher, but I think I would take it down to like a middle school teacher. So I love mentoring. I love teaching. And so I think if I applied right now to be a middle school teacher, they might say I'm overqualified, but I think I will have a great time. I love working with kids too. So absolutely, I think I would love to be a middle school teacher for like a summer, and that's it.
Yeah, I think that's great. You can also get that fulfilled through mentorship, tutoring, even like maybe guest lecturing here and there. But I like that answer because it's a very important job, and you might derive a lot of pleasure out of doing that.
Right. I would love, actually, I taught at a boot camp for 2 years. I definitely enjoyed that experience. I've been looking to maybe become an adjunct professor at the college around me. But yeah, I think teaching at a middle school would just be a way to help the young kids grow, learn. So I would definitely love that job.
That's a good answer. I like it a lot. Taiwo, thank you so much for being here. This was an awesome conversation. I appreciate you giving the time, but also your background experience. And thank you for sharing it with me and with our entire audience.
Thanks, Noah. Thanks so much for having me.
I want to thank Alon Cohen for recommending Taiwo as today's guest, and to you, our listeners, for joining us on this episode of Transferable Skills. Remember, the skills you've gained can take you anywhere. Until next time, keep exploring those transferable skills.